The first thing people noticed was the smell. Wet reeds. Mud. Marsh water drying in the cold. The second thing they noticed was the walls. Not logs. Not planks. Woven reeds packed thick between wooden frames covering nearly the entire outside of Josiah Reed's cabin. That was when the laughter started. He's building himself a bird nest. One spark and the whole wall goes up. Should have used proper timber like everyone else. Josiah ignored every word. Because unlike the others in the valley, he had spent years working river expeditions far south before returning north after his father's death. During those travels, he learned something frontier builders rarely considered. Cold isn't stopped by thickness alone. It's stopped by trapped air. That lesson followed him home, especially after his first winter back in the valley nearly killed him. The cabin he inherited looked sturdy enough from the outside. Thick timber walls, stone chimney, solid roof. But winter found every weakness immediately. Drafts slid through gaps between locks. The walls radiated cold straight through the room after sunset. Every morning frost coated the inside corners despite fires burning all night long. Josiah spent more time feeding the stove than sleeping. By February, half his woodpile was gone. That frightened him badly, because the valley still had weeks of winter left. So when spring finally arrived, Josiah started searching for another way. Most people expected him to cut more timber, build thicker walls, maybe add another stove. Instead, he went into the marshes. All summer long, people watched him harvest cattails by the wagon load from the wetlands south of the river. Thick bundles of reeds dried beside his cabin beneath covered racks until entire stacks towered taller than the roof itself. Nobody understood, especially not once he started weaving them. Long panels of tightly braided cattail reeds stretched between thin willow branches, forming flexible mats almost 4 inches thick. Children from the valley came specifically to stare at them. They looked like giant baskets. In some ways, they were. But Josiah knew something the others didn't. Ancient river civilizations used woven reeds for insulation thousands of years earlier because dry reeds trapped enormous amounts of stable air while remaining lightweight and naturally resistant to temperature swings. The principle was simple. Still air resists heat loss. Not solid walls. Still air. Logs conducted cold eventually. Then stone absorbed it. But layered reeds trapped countless tiny pockets of unmoving air inside their woven structure. That changed everything. The real surprise came when Josiah began attaching the reed panels directly to the cabin exterior. Not loosely, carefully. He built a secondary frame several inches outside the original timber walls, then packed woven cattail mats into the cavity between them before sealing the entire surface with clay-lime plaster. The cabin slowly transformed. By autumn, it looked strange beyond description. The original log structure disappeared beneath textured, earth-colored walls reinforced with woven reed patterns beneath the plaster surface. Harlan Pike laughed hardest of all. "You wrapped your cabin in swamp grass." Josiah kept working, because the details mattered. The reed layers created insulation cavities throughout the structure. The clay plaster sealed drafts while still allowing moisture to escape slowly instead of trapping condensation inside the walls. That balance mattered enormously. Most poorly insulated cabins suffered from wet cold as much as freezing air. Damp walls stole heat faster than dry ones. Josiah's system handled both. Dry reeds, breathing plaster, trapped air. Everything worked together. Caleb Turner visited first once the exterior walls neared completion. He pressed one hand against the reed-packed section curiously. "It feels soft. It feels insulated." "That's not a normal wall." "No," Josiah agreed. "That's the point." Caleb looked skeptical. "So swamp plants are supposed to beat timber now?" Josiah cut open one spare reed panel and held it toward him. Thousands of hollow fibers layered tightly together caught lantern light along their interiors. "Every one of these traps air," Josiah explained. "Enough layers together slow heat movement almost completely." Caleb frowned thoughtfully. "That sounds expensive." "It sounds cheaper than burning twice the firewood forever." That answer stayed with Caleb, because everyone in the valley measured survival partly by wood. How much you cut, how quickly you burned through it, how nervous you became by late winter. Josiah intended to change that entirely. The first frost arrived early that year. Thin ice formed across water troughs before sunrise while northern winds swept hard across the valley. Families sealed windows and stacked extra wood beside stoves. Josiah lit his first fire inside the reed-insulated cabin quietly after dark. The difference appeared within hours. The room warmed faster. More importantly, it stayed warm longer. Usually cabin walls cooled rapidly once outside temperatures dropped. By midnight, most homes felt cold again unless fires stayed roaring constantly. Not this time. The insulated walls held warmth inside, instead of radiating it outward through exposed locks. Drafts nearly vanished entirely. Even the floor stayed warmer because cold air no longer poured endlessly through the structure. Josiah slept through the entire night, without waking once to feed the stove. That alone felt miraculous. By morning, frost covered nearly every cabin window in the valley. Inside Josiah's cabin, the glass remained mostly clear. Caleb noticed immediately when he visited later carrying grain sacks. "You already burned your morning fire? Haven't needed one yet." Caleb stopped. The cabin still felt comfortable despite barely any flame remaining in the stove. "How?" Josiah tapped the wall beside him. "The heat stayed where I left it." Caleb pressed one palm carefully against the plastered reed wall. Not warm exactly, but not freezing either. The wall no longer sucked heat from the room like bare logs did. "You really think marsh reeds are doing this?" Josiah smiled faintly. "I think people have survived winters with smarter materials longer than we remember." Outside, the valley prepared for deep cold the usual way. More blankets, more firewood, more patching cracks between logs. Inside the reed-insulated cabin, Josiah prepared differently. Moderate fires, steady heat, minimal loss. Then November storms arrived. Hard winds swept across the valley for nearly 3 straight days, driving snow sideways against every exposed wall. Cabins creaked. Drafts worsened. Families crowded close to stoves while room corners froze solid. Inside Josiah's cabin, the reed-packed walls muffled wind almost completely. The structure felt calmer, warmer, stable. That frightened Caleb more than if the experiment failed, because it meant the strange woven walls actually worked better than traditional cabins. Then December arrived, and with it came the first true blizzard of the season. Just after midnight, violent pounding shook Josiah Reed's front door. Josiah opened the door against a blast of snow so fierce it nearly tore the lantern from his hand. Caleb Turner stumbled inside first, pulling Mrs. Tolland behind him while wine screamed through the doorway like an animal trying to force its way indoors. "Close it," Mrs. Tolland shouted. Josiah shoved hard against the timber until the latch finally dropped into place. And instantly, the cold stopped advancing. Not completely, but enough that everyone inside felt the difference immediately. Outside, the blizzard raged hard enough to erase entire sections of the valley. Inside the reed-insulated cabin, warmth remained trapped calmly beneath the low ceiling while the stove burned far lower than it should have during weather this brutal. Mrs. Tolland stared around the room in disbelief. "There's barely any fire." Josiah hung their frozen coats beside the stove. "Doesn't need much." That answer unsettled Caleb more than the storm outside. His father's cabin required constant feeding already. Fires roared day and night, while cold still crept through walls and floors. But here, the warmth stayed put. The reed-packed walls absorbed almost none of it. Instead of heat racing outward through timber logs, the trapped air inside thousands of woven cattail fibers slowed everything down. Heat moved slowly. Cold moved slowly. That balance changed the entire cabin. Another knock came moments later. Then another. By midnight, nearly 10 people crowded inside Josiah's home. Old Mr. Wexler arrived after frost split part of his stovepipe. Harlan Pike came because snow drifted through cracks in his north wall faster than he could seal them. 2 Miller children huddled beneath quilts while their parents struggled to keep livestock alive through the storm. Every newcomer entered expecting roaring heat. Instead, they found something stranger. Stillness. Warmth that didn't fluctuate wildly. No freezing drafts sliding across the floor. No icy corners hidden behind furniture. The cabin felt insulated from the storm itself. Caleb finally walked toward one of the exterior walls and pressed both palms against it carefully. The plaster felt cool, but not cold. Most winter cabin walls became almost untouchable during storms because freezing temperatures transferred straight through exposed timber. Not here. The reed-filled cavity interrupted that movement completely. "It's not leaking heat," Caleb whispered. Josiah nodded. "That's the whole trick." Harlan shook his head slowly while staring around the room. All these years we kept building thicker logs. When we should have trapped more air, Josiah finished. Outside, the blizzard worsened. Wind hammered roofs hard enough to shake loose snow from rafters. Drifts climbed halfway up cabin walls across the valley. Somewhere beyond the storm came the sharp cracking sound of timber failing beneath ice pressure. But inside the reed-insulated cabin, the noise arrived softened. Muted. Even sounds struggled to move through the thick woven walls. That surprised everyone most. The cabin didn't merely stay warmer. It felt protected, as if the storm itself remained farther away. Mrs. Tolland noticed it first. You can barely hear the wind. Josiah glanced toward the plastered walls glowing softly in lantern light. The reeds break more than temperature. That was true. The woven layers absorbed vibration naturally. Wind striking the exterior lost force before reaching the inner cabin walls. Everything slowed down crossing those barriers. Heat, cold, sound, drafts. The ancient method worked because it controlled movement itself. Around 2 in the morning, Caleb stepped outside briefly with Josiah to bring more wood from the covered stack. The cold hit instantly. Violent. Sharp enough to steal breath. Snow blasted sideways across the yard while the storm roared hard enough to blur the barn completely from sight. Then they stepped back inside. And once again, warmth settled around them almost immediately. No lingering chill. No desperate effort for the cabin to recover temperature. The insulated walls held the heat steady even after the door opened. Caleb stared openly now. My father's house loses half its warmth every time someone enters. Josiah added another modest log to the stove. That's because the walls store cold faster than the air stores heat. Caleb looked toward the reed-packed structure surrounding them. And yours doesn't. Mine slows the exchange. That sentence stayed with him. Because winter survival suddenly sounded less like fighting harder, and more like losing slower. The storm continued until dawn. When morning finally arrived pale and bitter, Josiah opened the shutters carefully. The valley looked buried alive. Snow covered fences entirely. Several chimneys leaned dangerously beneath ice buildup. One shed roof had collapsed completely under drifting snow. Yet inside the reed-insulated cabin, the stove still burned low. Warmth still lingered. And the woodpile beside the door remained almost untouched compared to everyone else's. That changed everything. By afternoon, word spread across the valley. The swampgrass cabin stayed warmer than the log houses. The walls blocked wind better than timber. The fire burned half as much wood. People stopped laughing immediately. Instead, they started asking questions. How thick should the reed layers be? Did the reeds rot? Could ordinary marsh grass work too? Why cover it with clay? Josiah answered patiently. Dry reeds lasted years if protected from moisture. Clay stopped drafts while allowing walls to breathe. Air mattered more than material weight. And woven layers worked better than solid walls because trapped air resisted movement naturally. The valley changed slowly after that winter. Families began adding reed insulation beneath roofs and between timber walls. Some packed dried marsh grasses into floor cavities before sealing them with plaster. Others built exterior windbreak walls inspired by Josiah's layered design. Nobody called the method primitive anymore. The blizzard settled that permanently. Spring arrived late but gentle. Snow melted from rooftops while marshland thawed beneath returning birds and soft rain. One evening Caleb stood outside Josiah's cabin studying the textured plaster walls glowing gold beneath sunset. You know what bothers everyone most now? He asked. That I was right? Caleb laughed softly. That the smartest house in the valley was basically insulated with weeds. Josiah smiled at that. Because it was true. People spent generations believing stronger walls meant heavier walls. But the ancient builders understood something better. Winter isn't defeated by fighting the cold directly. It's defeated by trapping warmth carefully enough that the cold never fully gets inside. And long after the hardest winter passed, travelers crossing the valley still stopped to stare at the strange plastered cabin hidden beneath woven cattail walls. Most expected it to look fragile. Instead, they found one of the warmest homes in the valley, built using a forgotten trick older than the country itself.